Hello and welcome to today's webinar in the SmartEnCity Network webinar series. Today I have the pleasure of introducing and coordinating a webinar about low carbon mobility. My name is Simon Sørensen and I am a part of the SmartEnCity project. And today's webinar will introduce mobility and low carbon mobility from both an overall generic perspective, and we will also learn about concrete experiences from two of the lighthouse cities in the SmartEnCity project. It's Sonderborg in Denmark and Vitoria-Gasteiz in the Basque region in Spain. So first I will shortly introduce the SmartEnCity project. It is a project funded by the European Union's Horizon 2020 program, and we are 35 partners from 6 countries that develop strategies that can be replicated throughout the cities of Europe, and we aim to develop this in a systemic approach for transforming the cities. A part of this is that the SmartEnCity network is being developed. It's a network where cities can sign up to become a part of this replication process and to be in the loop of sharing knowledge and experience. One way that the knowledge is being shared is through this series of webinars, and with these webinars we aim to inspire cities and assist all kinds of city representatives, being city planners, policy makers, companies, etc., in working with their city transition. And all of these webinars will be available, and some of them already are available online at the SmartEnCity.eu website. So this is an overview of the 5 topics that we address in the webinar series. We have already had the webinar 1, 2, 3, and 4. And today we have number 5, and for now the last webinar. We will have a break in the series and then evaluate, and I will get back to this at the end of today's webinar. But today we address the low carbon mobility topic, and as mentioned already, the first 4 webinars are already available to watch online at SmartEnCity.eu. There you can see webinars about strategic energy planning from both a national perspective and city perspective, and you can see a webinar about how to facilitate energy transition at city level, and a webinar about citizen engagement, and also a webinar about energy retrofitting of buildings. So if we move into today's topic about low carbon mobility, this is an overview of the webinar today, and as you can see we have 3 parts in today's webinar which all addresses low carbon mobility. Part 1 addressing it from an overall generic perspective, and part 2 and part 3 sharing experiences and learnings about low carbon mobility from Sonderborg in Denmark and Vitoria-Gasteiz in Spain. And also just to introduce who will be speaking at today's webinars. Firstly, we have Mathiesen from the Sustainable Energy Research Group at Aalborg University in Denmark. Brian is a professor in energy planning at Aalborg University, and one of his main research areas are smart energy systems, and this also includes what the role of mobility system have in this system and transition of cities. He will talk generally about the role of mobility and transport in energy systems and the city transition. Then we also have from Sonderborg, Prehn and Peter Rathje. Prehn is from Sonderborg Municipality, and Peter Rathje is from ProjectZero in Sonderborg. Both Kurt and Peter have been involved in the development of mobility strategy for Sonderborg, and they are directly involved in the mobility actions in Sonderborg, which they will present the experiences and learnings from. And we also have Aitor Albaina from Centro de Estudios Ambientales, shortly CEA. Aitor is working with the sustainable development strategies for Vitoria-Gasteiz, including their mobility strategy and actions, and he will present their approach, experiences and learnings about changing the mobility system towards more low-carbon mobility. And you can find more information about today's presenters at their respective websites. This presentation from today will also be available online shortly after today. If you have questions during the webinar, it is possible to write them in the question box, and then we will try to answer in the end. I will also encourage you to email any of your questions to me, and then we will make sure to direct it to the right person. I will now give the floor to our first presenter of today, Brian Mathiesen, who will talk about low-carbon mobility generally and in energy systems and city transition.
Thank you, Simon. My name is Brian. I will talk about the overall role of mobility in a renewable energy transition. In our research, we find that mobility is at the utmost importance. Across Europe, we see a very big challenge in regards to transforming the transport sector into something that fits into a renewable energy system. When we look at the role of cities in regards to mobility, the role of cities is very high. Cities have a key role to unlock the potentials in modal shifts, in different new types of vehicles, and in the overall transport system and mobility services. When we look at the overall challenge for the energy transition in Europe, we see that mobility is really a large portion of the current use of fossil fuels. In this graph, you see how large the overall primary energy consumption in Europe is, and you also see that the predominant fossil fuel demand is actually in the oil which goes to transport. When we look at transport, it is clear that that oil is by far the largest demand of fossil fuels, and that actually the oil that goes to transport is a very large portion of this. We also know that there are different effects of using oil in the transport sector. We all know that we have a lot of carbon emissions, but we also know that there are a lot of negative impacts on health, which in recent years has actually gained rather a lot of attention in light of what's called the Dieselgate. The oil is actually burned rather inefficiently. When we look at the type of energy conversion that we use in vehicles, being private or more heavy-duty vehicles such as ships or planes, we find that there's quite a lot of losses. Actually, in a personal vehicle that we know ourselves, the amount of energy that is converted into something that actually moves us from A to B is maybe between 20 and 25%, meaning that 75% of the oil is lost in the internal combustion engine. In the future, this has to change. There's a massive potential to save energy if we replace these more inefficient modes or vehicles with new technologies such as electric vehicles, and I will come back to this later on. Most of the light-duty vehicles can also be a lot of this can also be replaced with electric vehicles, but there are also challenges in regard to very heavy transport types where batteries are simply too expensive and not possible to use in this transition. In our research group, we have had a lot of attention on what the role of the transport sector is, seeing that the amount of energy that goes into the transport sector compared to heating and the electricity demands is rather high. In a research project we completed a few years back, we started really to look at the integrated role of transport, and we did a case study on the Danish energy system where we saw how a bigger role and which type of role transport should play in light of wanting to integrate much larger amounts of wind and much larger amounts of other types of renewables. You can see recent studies on this concept, which we call SmartEnCity Denmark, on our website smartenergysystems.eu. In this project we completed a few years back, called the CISA project, we identified more than 40 different modes of transport. We took the overall energy demands and the overall transport demands and tried to map what are actually the needs and what are the different modes of transport and types of vehicles that meet these needs today. In doing this, we were able to identify different pathways in order to put in renewables into the transport or the mobility sector. And I would say this slide sort of presents some of the results. What is clear based on the analysis is that 100% renewable energy in the transport sector is for sure a technical possibility. When we do it, we'll decide, and when we do it and how we do it will decide how costly it will be. The first thing we need to look at is how is transport growing in the different modes of transport. It is very clear based on this research that there's no connection between official trend lines in the growth of, for example, personal vehicles and the investments in roads. So if you ask a national body or an EU body about what is the expected increase, it will normally be connected to what is the expected increase in the economic growth. From the research we did, it was clear that there is a connection between the type of investments that are made in society and the growth that comes from it. Meaning that when you invest in more roads, you will have more increase in road-based transport. On the other hand, if you invest in rail, you will have more growth in the rail-based transport. In the first phase, it is really necessary to look at how do we lower the increase in the transport needs through urban planning. So this means how can we avoid these investments that we know induce a higher demand. We imagine we have a 2% increase in demand until 2050 or 2060, we will have to meet a much larger demand with renewables than otherwise. So lower increased demand through urban planning is key. The next thing is changed investment strategies and modal shift. This means that we need to look at the amount of resources or investments we put into road-based resources, road-based infrastructure compared to rail-based infrastructure. And we need a clear strategy, a long-term strategy to develop this because the adverse effects are that we will have a large growth in either modal type of vehicle. The third issue we addressed was more efficient vehicles. And this means that we need to start to change from lower efficiency internal combustion engines to higher efficiency internal combustion engines. But it also means in the fourth phase that we really need to look at in which parts of our transport sector can we actually electrify. We can see from our research that it is much more efficient if we can use rail for transporting goods than to use a truck. The same goes for passenger transport. So we can have more efficient vehicles in this respect, more efficient modes of transport. But we will have a high amount of vehicles on the road as well. And here we need to take advantage of the very large potential for electric vehicles. Electric vehicles can actually cover a very large amount of a day-to-day transport need. For example, we know for a fact that more than 95% of kilometers are traveled on trips below 100 kilometers. And this means that most people can have a large advantage of either battery electric vehicles or hybrid electric vehicles. The last challenge I will look a bit more into now, which is the heavy-duty vehicles. The heavy-duty vehicles can hardly be replaced by batteries, and some transport cannot be moved to rail. The potential is limited, which means we need some kind of fuel that we can use, like we use gasoline today. We did a review of biofuels, different types, biodiesel, biogas, bioethanol, different types of conversion to biofuel, and we looked at what is the area demand that we need for this, because in the future bioenergy is key to preserve and use efficiently, but land is also key to use efficiently. When we look at the overall picture, we see that it is 10 to 20 times more efficient on a land use basis to use electricity directly than biofuels. And this has led us to think that maybe we need to look differently at what kind of liquid fuels we can use in the heavy-duty transport in the future. We used a lot of effort to investigate different types of alternatives to bioethanol and biodiesel, and we came up with something we call electrofuels. And here's an example of an electrofuel that can be used in heavy-duty transport. In this case, we have the example of producing methanol, which is on your right, and on the left you see the input of biomass and the input of electricity. Electricity goes through an electrolyzer, produces hydrogen, and biomass is gasified, which is then converted into this liquid fuel here, which is methanol, could also be methane. But the key thing to understand here is if we want to meet the demands in ships, trucks and planes, we need to find ways to take electricity from wind turbines or PV and put them into the heavy-duty vehicles in order to make the whole picture fit and also to integrate even more renewables. There are co-benefits of addressing transport. We see a lot of efficiency has the effect that it can also improve congestion and save time and money. It can improve the health effects or reduce the health effects from harmful emissions, and there's also significant cost savings from these new technologies. We can group these the problems into two areas. I talked a little bit about it. We have the light vehicles, where we may have a lot of electrification, and we have the heavy-duty vehicles, where I introduced the concept of electrofuels using hydrogen. Also, we know we need to look at savings in these areas. We need to look at efficiency, and we need to look at new technologies. If we look at the different types of means we have for making a strategy on mobility towards renewable energy, we can divide them into these areas. If we look at savings, already now we can start looking at public transport and cycling or walking. We can increase rail transport for heavy-duty goods. We can have car sharing. We look at the new technologies. We can already now introduce very many types of electric vehicles. On the efficiency side, we can, in the medium term, introduce self-driving cars, smart electric vehicles charging, electrify rail if it's not already electrified. And in the longer term, we can start to also transform the heavy-duty transport with electrofuels. These efforts have a lot of different effects, where many of them are connected to reducing the total energy demand. Some, which is the electric vehicles, for example, is also able to directly increase the consumption of renewables. If we have a smart charge, we can also use the batteries we have in the vehicles to charge at times when we have a lot of renewable energy, and use this electricity when there's a demand for transport. The system flexibility can also be improved with electrifying transport. We see that we need to use a lot of different types of means to transform the transport sector over towards a renewable energy system. There is no one quick fix. We can reduce the carbon emission significantly by switching to electric vehicles, and in the longer term we can start to look at electrofuels and have these transform also the aviation or the ships or the trucks. These were all the words from my side, and now I think Simon will introduce the next speaker.
Yes, thank you, Brian, for some good points about mobility from an overall perspective. We now move on to some more concrete experiences about mobility, starting with Kurt Prehn and Peter Rathje from Sonderborg, who will share experiences from their mobility transition approach in Sonderborg and how they actually implement low carbon mobility actions. So just a second.
Your presentation, Brian, and thanks for handing over, Simon. Kurt Prehn and myself will, in the next 15 minutes, give you an update on how we act and think and act, and also present two cases. The introduction I will take care of, doing a little bit of framing. What's our situation, the size of city? I will introduce how we did a common planning across sectors and across parties, and also how we execute that strategy. And then Kurt Prehn will present selected cases, and we will sum up with learnings and recommendations. The thinking from the Sonderborg ProjectZero, which is a public-private partnership already, is you need to have solutions in this area. I just highlighted some icons, but solution will not make it happen. You also need to look at the policy framing. This is a picture of, I think, our city council, which is the highest authority at the local level. But we also need to secure society participation. This is just one example of, you could say, a very young citizen, but of course, sustainable transportation or low carbon transportation require all kind of stakeholders. A few words about where we are located. We are in the south of Denmark. We have 76,000 citizens, and 2/3 of our geographical area is actually an island with bridge connection, with ferry connections. It's quite a big territory with a lot of coastline. We have the biggest industrial group in Denmark on the top of the island. We have still a lot of pig farming and food processing industry in the area, and transport in our area, like in most other areas of Denmark, account for approximately 1/3 of our carbon emissions. So the big question have been for years, so what are the green or low carbon or zero carbon solutions? It's also important here to mention that the ProjectZero vision for the area already have reduced our overall carbon emissions by 35% since we started in 2007. We left the transportation open and concentrated much more on buildings and behavior. Addressing the mobility, we found it should be segmented into 4 areas of intervention. I think Brian already introduced, start with biking and sustainable transportation. This triangle here looks a little bit like the one we all learn about food. You should select from the top and not from the bottom. So this also stresses the importance of starting with biking and sustainable walking as transportation mean. But very important, you need to also add public transportation and personal cars. Today in an area with that fragmented geographical structure we have, of course, plays an important role. And so do heavy transportation of goods, both to the shops, but also from industry, from the farmers to the industry, which account for approximately half of our transportation work. We warmed up for a number of years, and then 2 years back we decided, let's try and create an overall green transportation strategy. We selected these 4 intervention areas. We had for each area a very well organized and implemented workshop with idea generation. We qualified the ideas, we compiled the initiatives, and we had a common evaluation and selection, which was all this carried out across sector and across stakeholders, so there was a lot of public and private engagement. It was presented in public before we asked the City Council to discuss, and they exactly 1 year back had this political discussion, and by the whole City Council across all political parties agreed this is what we are going to do, so they approved. It outlines 21 initiatives to be implemented before 2020 and more beyond 2020. It's based on each of these initiatives have a rating based on how easy it is to implement, potential job creation, which is important for a municipality, CO2 reduction, synergy with existing strategy, but also the impact here. And when we mention here that these initiatives here, the bouquet is supposed to reduce by 25%, it's 25% of this third of the carbon emission for the area. So how do we implement this? We have our City Council established a transport committee which have a certain representation across sectors. You see people from rural areas, you see representatives from the city administration, from the business community, and also myself as a ProjectZero representatives are part of this. But what is maybe more important than that this committee meets is how this committee speak or interact with the technical committee, communicating with the economic committee of the municipality and leading to resolutions by the city council. So this is, you could say, our channel, but this new, so to say, document or plan have actually created a new basis, a new platform for our future discussions. I will now hand over the word to Kurt. Kurt will talk about two initiatives. One of them is a new biogas bus initiatives being implemented this month, and the other initiative is a Biking for All initiative. And Biking for All we have mentioned, and more, because we also want people who already bike to bike more. But Kurt, please introduce your thinking with the new biogas buses.
Thank you, Peter. In 2014, we started to look into public transportation. We had the opportunity that our contract with the bus company will run out in 17. So we were looking into how could we make public transportation low carbon, or if we had the luck or the opportunity, carbon free. We started with looking into an electric bus solution, but found out that it didn't really match our community, because we had this very big production of manure in the area. So we looked into gas buses on a very early stage, and we also found out that a lot of cities in Denmark had had 7 or 8 gas buses running, but we wanted to go full in from the very start, and we also wanted to make a kind of intermodality between sustainable transportation, biking, and the buses, because it's evident that when you put people in the buses, you steal from the bikers and vice versa. So we make it possible to take your bike with you in the bus from the very start. So we made a tender from the start. We wanted buses running on biogas, certified in the beginning, and the possibility to take at least 4 bikes in every bus. We had also the challenge that we were losing passengers in the buses nearly every day. So we had to make public transportation in a way more sexy. So we found out that a lot of people use a lot of time waiting for the bus, and you can come up with a solution to make that time less by giving the passengers in real-time information. You can plan your route, your traveling with that information. The bus is late. The bus is so you can start from your home a little bit later. Therefore, from the very start, we introduced real-time information on an app, and later on displays on the media hubs. The status on how far are we in this? We have under construction slow filling station for 50 buses in outside Sonderborg, and in nearby we'll make a service station for public transportation where they can tank or fill gas. In addition to that, we have made a little satellite filling station in the northern part of the island because we can save transportation with empty buses from this part of our area to the bigger filling station. You can see a picture down that we are also planning to build a biogas plant. It has moved to certain kind of areas, but it's not yet made any kind of decision where it is situated, but it will come very, very fast. Yeah, the next case is biking forward. We have this challenge or goals that minimum 20% of citizens shall use their bike minimum 5 kilometers per day. It's a very ambitious goal, I must say. We have the challenge is that only about 30,000 citizens lives in Sonderborg. The rest of the almost 50,000 citizens lives in the open land, the rural areas. So bike transportation is a challenge for a lot of people. We have furthermore the challenge that biking as overall in Denmark are decreasing, and so we have to get on the bike, so to say. Let's do something to make it happen in another way in Sonderborg. Yeah.
Yeah, this is Peter speaking again. We already created for education, you could say a lifelong or education-long learning from kindergarten to university. What we, of course, now are adding is not understand your home, your building, and the society around you. Of course, we also in this learning system here now are introducing biking, leading to the next slide, Kurt, where we address parking and infrastructure.
We have a little lack in Sonderborg in infrastructure and facilities for the biking. As you can see, we have a very big parking problem with the bikes. We want to make that better. We have a very good and fine net of biking paths. We have over 300 kilometers with biking paths with asphalt, and furthermore about 300 kilometers with gravel. So we have the facilities to make biking happen in a more considerate way. We have built a super fast bike lane, so-called, from Sonderborg to Norborg. It's about 30 kilometers. We are planning to make more 2-1 ways. It means that you make a wider path for the bikes and only one lane for the cars. We are planning to make it more easy to get into the city of Sonderborg on your bike and more safe. And we are planning also to open our streets where you have all the shops for biking. They are in some ways closed right now. We are planning to make some campaigns this year, and we have made a cycle forum. It's a citizen driven initiative to get ideas from the citizens, and they will also get the opportunity to make campaigns by themselves.
Okay, this is Peter again. Thank you, Kurt. This is just a recap of what we already have addressed. You need to start with getting the political support. Our own experiences, you need a plan before you really can start acting. And you also need to get into a mode where setting targets and measuring and following up leads you to have free space for starting new initiatives. We added a couple of slides on ferries because, as we started mentioning here, we are also an island. So the first ferry picture is an actual electrical ferry which will be implemented starting next year, so it's under construction. The other one is maybe existing somewhere, but we have an ambition to have such a ferry, also allowing bikers to take the ferry to the north of Germany. Thank you, Simon, and this was the presentation from Sonderborg.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you, Kurt. Very nice points, and we will hurry on to our last presenter for today, Aitor. I will give you the floor.
Hi, thanks, Simon. So yes, good afternoon. I'm Aitor Albaina from the Environmental Studies Center of the Vitoria-Gasteiz City Council, and I will introduce you the low carbon mobility measures that our city has applied in the last decade. Okay, I will start with some facts about Vitoria-Gasteiz, that is the administrative capital of the Basque Country. It's a medium-sized city hosting around 250,000 inhabitants, and is world famous because of the European Green Capital 2012 award. It's worth mentioning that our city multiplied by 5 the population in the last 50 years. Still, our city is a quite compact city with around 50 homes per hectare and around 100 inhabitants per hectare. And we like to say that our city is a city with everything is at hand, accessible on foot and by bicycle. And it is well illustrated here, where you can see that nearly 100% of the population is living at less than 3 kilometers from the city center. So Vitoria-Gasteiz is not only compact, but also flat, and this makes the city an optimum environment for active mobility modes, such as cycling or walking. Regarding accessibility, you have here a map with the slopes in the city, and it is quite flat, except for, as you can see in the center of the image, the medieval quarter. But the city amended this by installing mechanical ramps here. So it's quite a good city for cycling and walking, as I said. I want also to mention that our city aims to become a carbon neutral city by 2050. And in order to face this challenge, it has been measured that the CO2 emissions related to transport, as you can see on the left image, should be reduced by 82% by this year. That is quite a strong challenge for us. Not taking into account the industrial sector, the transport sector represents nearly 30% of the CO2 emissions in our city, with data of 2006. And this was the context where we started to prepare the city's sustainable urban mobility plan, and the situation was quite worrying. As you can see here, in the previous 10 years, the car sharing in the mobility distribution, modal distribution, was increasing. Nearly 40% of the trips performed in a typical labor day in our city was performed by car, with the private car. The bicycle represented around 3% of the trips at that moment, and this was at the walking mode's expense, that has been reducing from nearly 70% in the 80s to just 50% at 2006. Moreover, the average strip length was about to increase due to the build of 2 new neighborhoods in the city periphery. As you can see here in the image, those within the circles. And on the right graph, you can see that around 25,000 people moved from the city center to the new neighborhoods in just 10 years. And this started around 2006. So the average trip length was about to be increased significantly, and this was going to affect the mobility modal distribution. So we were really distressed about this, and we took this into account when designing the new city's sustainable urban mobility and public space plan. I want to remark the public space because we wanted to not only introduce sustainable urban mobility measures in our city, but also to give back the public space to the people. Just to avoid the situation depicted in the illustration of a car-devoted city. How? We wanted to discourage the private vehicle use, whilst at the same time improving public transport and promoting active mobility modes such as walking and cycling. It has to be said that this new plan was launched in 2008 with the full political consensus, that is remarkable, and also after a citizen participation process. Thus, in this plan, we implemented what we can say a push and pull strategy. And in 2009, Vitoria-Gasteiz created a totally new bus and tram network that was optimized and reduced significantly the bus and frequencies compared to the previous one, around 10 minutes between each bus. This was really good for the people, and they acknowledged that. But the very same day, the city nearly tripled the parking tariffs in the city center. And also, we increased by 30% the regulated area extension. So, as you can imagine, this was a very unpopular measure at the first stage, but truly effective. The idea was to avoid the private cars in the city center and promote other alternative modes, especially the public transport and the active mobility ones. To accomplish that, we also increased our pedestrian network. It has to be said that our city was one of the pioneers in Spain, and the car-free area in the city center started in 1976. And by today, it represents around 500,000 square meters of pedestrian area. Apart from that, we have 33 kilometers of urban pathways that are represented in the picture. We also improve our bicycle network that is now composed of 140 kilometers. We have introduced contraflow cycling lanes in one-way streets. We have installed up to 5,000 parking places for bicycles. We are implementing some regulatory changes to promote cycling, such as allowing cargo bikes in freight logistics to use the pedestrian area without time restrictions, or allowing bikes to overtake cars in the traffic lights. We also give safe cycling courses to students and adults, and we are implementing some traffic calming measures. Regarding this, I want to introduce the master stone of our city's sustainable urban mobility public space plan, that is the supper block scheme. You have here the representation of what is a supper block. Those two squares at the bottom, the one on the left is the previous situation, and the one on the right, the supper block scheme. That means that private cars and public transport, both, are kept outside the supper block, those green streets, while the inner streets are redesigned, those ones, to be mainly used by pedestrians. So the private car and public transport only use the external streets, the one on gray. We estimated that 77 supper blocks could be implemented in our city, and those are represented in the map. And so far, we just implemented 2 of them. But if we Some they have the money because those are expensive measures to implement. I will show it later. With all the super blocks in place, the public space devoted to pedestrians will double from 36% in 2006 scenario to 71% of the public space devoted to pedestrians. This is an example of a super block that was implemented in the city. The prior state of the street is on the top left corner. And this intervention was really successful, and it improves the social interaction and social life and the economic status of the area, apart from preventing the entrance of private cars and recovering, as you can see in the image, the public space for the citizens, for the pedestrians. But it costs a lot, and so far, as I say, we have only implemented 2 of the 77 foreseen super blocks. However, in between, as a transition, we are implementing a set of traffic calming measures in another 47 streets of the downtown with those 3 objectives that you can see. Improving road safety for pedestrians and cyclists, reduce the emission of pollutants, and the reclaim of the space for pedestrians. As I said, it represents a transition towards the super block, and in those calm streets, we have now a speed limit of 30 km/h. And in the super block scheme, that is the next stage of this transition, this accession will be just 10 km/h. Here there are several examples of the before and the after of 2 calm streets close to the city center. You see that the change is dramatic. And those are the main figures after 8 years, just 8 years. And you see that we succeed in reversing the rising trend in private car use, raising the pedestrian share, that is depicted in yellow, to 2002 levels, and increasing the use of bicycle, that is the pedestrian one is in green, bicycle in yellow, and car in blue. You say that the walking modal split recovered the levels of the start of the century. This is depicted in green. Now it's about 55% of the trips in a typical labor day. Those are the data from the different mobility surveys performed in the city. Regarding the private cars, we succeed and reduce the use of the car from 37% of the trips in 2006 to less than 25% in 2014, when the last mobility survey was performed. And probably the most successful and dramatic change was regarding the bicycle, that it was just 3% in 2006, and is now today around 15% of regarding the number of trips per day performed by bicycle. Has to be said that the total number of trips per inhabitant has also increased a lot in the last decade. Now it's around 4 trips per habitant a day. And although you see that in red that the public transport repartition is similar, it's around 8% of the trips, has to be said that the number of trips nearly doubled in the last decade because of this optimized scheme. And that's all. And those are my contact details. And I give back the floor to you, Simon.
Thank you, Aitor, for a very interesting presentation. So thank you to all the presenters for today. If you have any questions, please write them in the question box. I cannot see anyone, but if you have questions after this webinar, you can also write me an email at sss@planenergy.dk. So this was the 5th of the, until now, first 5 webinars hosted by the SmartEnCity network. Over the next months, we will have a break and evaluate these first 5 webinars. And if you have comments or recommendations for webinar topics we should address, you're also really encouraged to email me at sss@planenergy.dk. And remember that you can watch all the 5 webinars at the SmartEnCity website. Today's webinar should be available soon after we finish. And also at the SmartEnCity website, you can find more information about the SmartEnCity network and details about how you can join. And you can also sign up for the SmartEnCity newsletter that will provide you with all the latest information about the project. So with these words, this was it for today. So thank you all for joining, and see you out there.